I'd like to welcome you here. My name is John McDermott. I'm the director of a new program within the CGIAR called Agriculture for Nutrition and Health. It's been around for about a year now, or just over a year. It's led by IFPRI, and it has about 11 CGIAR centers of the 15 who are involved, so there's a lot of it, and there's a number of partners as well. And we wanted to take advantage of the fact that we have people coming from all the different centers and from our management committee coming from all over the world to be here and to take advantage of the fact that there's so many kind of interested and active partners in DC here that they could interact with. This is kind of a hotbed of interest in agriculture, nutrition, and health. So this is good. Now, this is not a very formal meeting, okay? Basically, we're going to share some ideas. I'm kind of describing it as modified speed dating, you know, where you go to these bars and you meet somebody for 10 or 15 minutes, then you go to the next one. We're not going to be quite that formal, but we're going to have 3 panels around kind of key areas of work, value chains, integrated programs, and policies, so that we can at least share some of the things we're doing and hear from other people, and hopefully that'll stimulate interest and ideas. We can have a bit of question and answer, and then the people you find interested in that kind of speed dating exercise you can network with when we have the reception. So this is an opportunity for us to get to know each other, and as a researcher, I've found that over the years, a lot of the great research collaborations and design of interesting innovations and stuff like that have come from pubs and coffee shops and things like that, or around meetings, not necessarily in the meeting. So let's keep this fairly informal and get to know each other. I wanted to introduce a few of the people involved in the A4NH program. Just so you know, you'll meet some of them up here. So we have a team of research leaders, and Lorian you're going to meet, she's going to be up here explaining stuff on value chains. You're going to meet Marie, who many of you know, who's on the integrated programs. And you're going to hear from Stuart, who's in the UK, on the policy side, hopefully if we can connect him. There's a couple of other research leaders for the team. Howdy Buas, many of you know, on Harvest Plus. I think Howdy's around. And Delia Grace leads the work on agriculture-associated diseases, which is an important part of value chains programs and policies. You know, in terms of agriculture, there's a lot of benefits for nutrition around better food and things like that, but there's also risks. And some of the risks are associated with bad food, food safety, intensifying agriculture where we get a lot of zoonoses or emerging diseases and things like that. So that's also part of this, how to lower the risk and increase the benefits from agriculture to nutrition and health. So those are some of the, we have some partners on our management committee I want to introduce you might not know. Jeff Waggy from the University of London, who leads a very interesting program funded by the Leverhulme Trust called the Leverhulme Center for Integrative Research in Agriculture and Health. And Sean Baker, I hope, is around. He's in the back there from HKI. So he's in common with the different groups we have here. And I also want to introduce somebody who's been working around the scenes and is really going to be a kind of a focal point to help connect our program with partners around here and the different research leaders, and that's Charlotte Block. So you want to stand up, Charlotte? Because they really need to know you. So Charlotte is going to be a key network and focal point for us in connecting with different groups, so get to know Charlotte. And then we have partners from ICRISAT. Our person from World Fish isn't here yet, from IITA, from ICRAF, from ICARDA, from CIAT, from SIP, from Bioversity, IFPRI, ILRI. So the number of different centers with different interests in different types of foods and commodities and broader and different systems interests. So this is great. And maybe Lucy, if you can say a few words Sure. on the other side. But we're happy to have this. And this, Monique instructed me to do something which I forgot to do. This kind of grew up of, we met with Monique and Daniel and a few other people to say, okay, what can we do together in kind of December last year? And so we said, okay, well, let's just meet and get everybody together and talk about this. There are obviously some higher level things that will come up in terms of advocacy or policy or things that are in common, but we just want to use this as an opportunity to meet and help people network. So Lucy.
Thanks, John. This is terrific, and really big thanks to IFPRI for hosting this, and to you, John and Charlotte, for organizing this event. It's terrific that you all are here. We're really grateful here at 1,000 Days. I should say that I represent the 1,000 Days Partnership, which was launched by Secretary Clinton in 2010 to bring greater awareness and action to the issue of maternal and child malnutrition. Of course, we focus on actions in the critical 1,000-day window between a woman's pregnancy and a child's second birthday. And we, as a community, and there's a lot of partners here in the room that participate in our advocacy working group, as a community, we're really grateful for the work that's being done to connect the dots, so to speak, on agriculture, nutrition, and health, in particular for the Agriculture for Nutrition and Health program. Our interest, of course, in this work is ensuring that there are better nutrition outcomes for women and children during this 1,000-day window. And despite what some naysayers may think, we really believe that agriculture has an enormously important role to play in improving maternal and child nutrition. In our view, of course, the key is the mother. Woman's food intake before, during, and after her pregnancy affects not only her nutritional status but also her child's. The upcoming series from the Lancet, there's a new series coming out in June on maternal and child nutrition that I think will serve to really underscore the critical importance of women's nutrition in particular. The first Lancet series, which launched in 2008, identified the 1,000-day window of opportunity for impact. So we're very excited about some of the work, and actually Marie Rell has been involved in writing one of the papers on nutrition sensitive programming and investments. So, as John said, I mean, this is kind of a wonderful opportunity to get to know each other through speed dating. But you're going to hear from a range of experts and folks. Many of you, of course, are working on the forefront of this issue of nutrition, agriculture, and health. So, from my standpoint, I mean, one of the things I hope that we can accomplish is just the sharing of ideas and information, really to help to help move the dialogue beyond there's not an evidence base there. We have to obviously get past that. I mean, we need to ensure that we can continue to work together, collaborate to move the conversation forward. And well, I hope that this conversation will be the first of many. It's great to get folks like you all in the room together, and let's see what comes of it. And as John said, I mean, I think some of the magic will happen during the reception. So I look forward to that. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so Lorian and Bonnie, can I ask you to come up? You could talk up here if you want. What do we talk about? Okay, no problem.
Oh, waiting a minute for. Okay.
And Daniel, excuse me.
In front of everybody else.
Welcome to GoToMeeting.
Daniel's the non-speaking
Online
part.
meetings made
Okay.
easy. Please enter your access code followed by the pound.
Thank you. So in the true tradition of speed dating, we're going to keep time. So
You entered
we'll give you kind of 15
9,
minutes
6,
to kind of
1,
landscape what's
0,
going on,
2,
what you see as some of the big
4,
issues,
5,
and then we'll have
0.
a Q&A.
If this
So,
is correct,
When does it
press
start
1.
after this,
To
or-
enable audio
Yeah,
control,
after this.
please enter your audio pin. There are 1 other callers on the call.
Stuart. Okay.
I hope that's
Okay.
a recorded voice. Okay.
So
good.
let me say a little bit about what the value chain component is, which is always the first question people have. And the value chain component is looking to basically leverage markets to deliver better nutrition. and in economic jargon term to see if there's solutions to the market failures in nutrition, which of course we know are widespread both because of lack of demand and often because of inability to supply. And so many of our projects are looking at nutrient-rich foods, trying to address constraints to availability, also developing new technologies that might deliver nutrition in new ways. And then finally, in terms of institutions, information, and trying to find new institutions to address information gaps and to change both consumer and producer behavior. Let me give you some real specific examples of emerging partnerships that we have, which allow us to both understand what kind of models might work, to test what works, and to hopefully disseminate findings and take them to scale. So, for example, we have a new research project Ray Yu Yan from AVDRC is leading, working with a vegetable seed company in Bangladesh to deliver nutrition messages. So where there's a convergence between their interest in promoting production and providing extension to enhance production of vegetables, to have that delivered along with nutrition messages about how the vegetables produced can fit into the diet and improve the diet. A second example is a partnership between Institute of Development Studies in Sussex and ILRI, and Delia is here from ILRI if you have further questions, to go back to the well-known Gramine Danone yogurt product case, and to look more specifically at lessons for what that would tell us about other kinds of initiatives to use to try to find partnerships that would deliver enhanced nutrition. And I know there were successes and failures with that and adjustments along the way in the last few years. So that might provide us with some interesting research questions to look at those models elsewhere. A third example is that we have a memorandum of understanding with Global Gap, which is the recognized leader in on-farm process standards for food safety. They started in produce but have expanded their reach to other products such as fish. And they are increasingly grappling with the need to have something that is not a global standard, that's not at the at the UK retailer level, but something that they call local gap, and where they want to work to adapt standards to local conditions and also reduce transactions costs through things like group certification. So again, another model. Some aspirations I have to find partners are in the following two areas. And the first is there are a number of both companies and public agencies working with aflatoxin control and trying to deal with quality control in supply chains for aflatoxin, particularly for things like infant foods. But also more broadly, I know the World Food Program is very concerned with this issue. So how they're dealing with that in environments where aflatoxin's widespread, how they deal with the information problem, how they provide extension to producers and market actors in terms of mitigation and reduction. And that's an area of broader interest among many of the researchers represented here. The other area we're looking for models and partners has to do with infant food quality control, because you can have a variety of technological developments to have locally sourced infant foods or complementary foods, but often in the market there's incomplete information. So preliminary tests done by Tufts University have shown that in fact local sources vary widely in quality. And that's why people revert to the international branded sources. So are there ways that we can think about institutions that will address that gap to complement technology development, for example, of new infant foods, such as work that World Fish is doing with fish fortified foods? And I understand that there are new opportunities that I just learned about to work with GAIN in the value chain projects that you have in terms of learning. And so let me turn it over to Bonnie. I will just mention that John had the foresight to make GAIN an early partner and develop an MOU with GAIN, and we have not fully exploited that MOU and those opportunities, and today's the day. So,
Okay,
Bonnie,
no
take it away.
pressure, no pressure. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of Agriculture and Nutrition at GAIN. And for those, I probably know 40% of you from having been within the CGIAR for some 15 years prior to that. So, hi. So maybe I take a moment and just talk a little bit about sort of the work that we're doing, because there is a lot of overlap, and a lot of it requires some rigorous evaluation and monitoring behind it, and certainly market analysis. For those who aren't familiar with GAIN, GAIN very much works on the delivery side of the equation and using market-based approaches to bringing foods closer to the base of the pyramid populations, recognizing that a lot of the world's undernourished actually do use markets and purchase a lot of their foods, including your complementary foods, even in rural areas. So there are sort of three areas that we're working, and I think a lot of you would agree, particularly the good work of Marie and Corinna and others. And I wouldn't dismiss the whole evidence and the need for evidence. We do evidence, people make choices, institutions are making choices, nutritionists will make choices, as will agriculturalists, and so we do need an evidence base behind some of our recommendations. So there is a whole piece on building the evidence base. And the example of that, I'd like to show two. The first example that looks along the value chain that we're working all along the rice value chain, and saying of all the opportunities to improve nutrition of rice, from farming input, all the way through to processing, we are taking a look at what's in Bangladesh in the rice value chain. What is the contribution of zinc fertilizer? Can it be used to improve the zinc density of rice? Now, there's a lot of good work already being done by Harvest Zinc, and can we put that in the context of Bangladeshi rices and flooded rices? And then as you move up the value chain, we look very much at the post-harvest phase, whether it be soaking, parboiling, and milling itself, the polishing process. Are there opportunities to modify those practices to retain more nutrients, or actually use soaking as a point of intervention for fortification? So we have a series of nutrition studies that we're doing, laboratory analysis, but we won't do that in isolation. We parallel those studies with market studies, because for us, we would like to see also that the fertilizer industry has the incentive to bring in micronutrients. We also want to see that the millers will have the incentive to undermill. So we do a series of market analyses in parallel to the nutrition analysis. In the case of the milling, it's quite a good one, because aligning the incentives for private sector along with nutrition is a tricky business. And in the case of milling, it's quite interesting, because the millers' associations are quite intrigued by our findings, because for them it translates to reduced cost. Mm-hmm. So if you can go ahead and couple expanding market share or reducing cost, you tend to get more private sector interest in that nutrition question. So that's a good example of how we're working along value chains. That's rice. Another evidence base that I was just speaking to Bruce Kogel that we'd like to share. We've just done a study at the request of USAID Kenya. They were uncertain what mothers were feeding their children as complementary foods in rural areas in the Feed the Future zones of influence. So they had asked us to go in and say, what are moms using for complementary foods? So we did a series of focused ethnographic surveys in southern Kenya in 2 regions, and then overlaid those focused ethnographic surveys, which told us the constraints for mothers. Mothers, where are you sourcing your foods? What are you feeding your children? How much of it is coming from the market? How much are they eating? What are the feeding practices? And overlaid that with the OptiFood tool that was developed by the London School, and was able to get an idea of the gap from what mothers are feeding their children to adequacy. That, for us, is important information as we try to build product lines, because what was interesting is that mothers are using markets for complementary food. With her half hectare, she's not necessarily reserving that for a complementary food. Plus, nutrition education has been actually quite successful in getting into these communities and saying you need a fortified complementary food in your diet. So she turns to the market to find that, and there are only the international products. So they tend to be quite expensive. So she's making a choice. She might purchase, and if she does, she may only feed once a week or twice a week, and that's not really where we want this to go, right? So it helps us provide some guidelines as to how we would go ahead and help stimulate the development of a locally sourced, fortified complementary food for those communities. So that's an example. And I know that there's a lot that's rich in stuff we could do together. On the policy advocacy side, there's an interesting project we have just started to touch on, which is on the cash crop value chains, coffee, tea, cocoa. We often dismiss those as non-nutritious and no nutrition opportunity. We were approached by some of the large cash crop companies associated with these who are interested in the health of their growers and are interested in whether we could somehow help catalyze best practices, or for lack of a better word, a certification process, whereby the large coffee, tea, and cocoa companies, Hershey's, Mars, these big companies, could then certify or put in place best practices for the growers. Now, we could say that's for the halo effect, for saying, we are a good company. However, I think there's a big opportunity here to really measure productivity, and really take a look at how will that translate to a dollar value for companies to improve health through nutrition. I think it's a big black box. I don't think we know. So it would be great to set up something around that. It's very nascent, but that seems to be an area where we could work. Finally, in GAIN, we have these investments. We make certain investments in certain commodity ideas. We've set up what's called the Marketplace for Nutritious Foods, which has now been launched it's been launched in Kenya and in Mozambique, and soon will be launched in Tanzania. It's an innovation engine to bring nutritious foods to market. It's coupled with a community of practice where small and medium scale enterprises all gather around those that want to bring nutritious food to market. We do marketable business plans for those entities. We bring in the investors for them. And we go ahead and actually provide small grants to unlock some of the constraints they're having in their whole value and supply chain. This needs to be monitored and evaluated. They need to be investigated as an engine, an effective engine itself to bring nutritious foods to market. And I don't know whether one takes a snapshot of a market and then do a baseline, midline, endline. But certainly the purpose of it is, in the end, to have more access to a more diversified food basket. So certainly we would want to bring in an organization such as A4NH to help us do that.
Wonderful. Thanks for getting us off to a great start for a number of things. One is very compelling and specific things that are quite exciting. Also showing how agriculture can link with the 1,000 days, both with the mums and with the infants. So some very good things there. And very stimulating, compelling stories and lots of partnership opportunities. Now I wanted to open it up for the next 15 minutes. And this can be a combination of things you think are a good idea that you're doing or questions you have, but it's kind of, let's view it as kind of information sharing as part of that, but opening it up to the wider group. So are there, Ramney.
Yes.
You need to use a mic, sorry.
Is there a roving mic somewhere?
Oh, there's, we'll hand it around, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. I'm Ramni Jamnadas from World Agroforestry Center, IFPRI. I'm really fascinated by the four elements which you presented, and I just feel that there's huge opportunities with fruit trees for complementary feeding. And I'm just thinking, and in fact, something after listening to you, have you ever thought of pureed fruits for babies? Because that's what Heinz is selling all in their little tumblers. So I'm thinking of that. Has that?
Let's take 2 or 3 comments.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you. It's Bruce Kogel from Biodiversity, and thank you very much, Barney, and also Lucy. I have a question for her. But just recently, you released as a consortium the Access to Nutrition Index, and I was really inspired by that effort. I know it's controversial, but on the other hand, the kind of work that we're doing in sustainable diets and looking at whole of diet approaches, I think speaks to thinking of the index in the future of reflecting some of these other issues around a diet, which in terms of the environmental impact as well as the nutrition cost. and sometimes ethical issues. So can you speak a little bit to what you're thinking about that index as GAIN? And the second question to Lucy in the 1,000 Days, we talk a lot about animal source foods in nutrition. I think one of the things is, I think you mentioned on, is the health and the nutrition of the mother as a breastfeeder, and that form of improving the quality of breast milk has really been a neglected area because it's such a critical complement to the complementary food. So whether it's GAIN or even the 1,000 Days, of how we can get much more thinking in terms of the health and nutrition of the mother.
Okay, maybe one or two more if there are people. If not, we can start on those two. Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah, fruit. So right, yes, of course. I mean, if we're trying to diversify the diet, the problem that you have, of course, as you move purified fruit through the value chains is the price point for the poor. Purees often bring a high cost to them, so we would want to investigate what is the incentive to bring for companies to take that on. Fruit in itself, I think we need to evaluate the actual contribution. Certainly, there are micronutrients that we want to preserve, particularly specific vitamins, and there are people in the audience who have much more information about specific fruits. Certainly, mangoes are something we're looking at, mango bars particularly in Bangladesh. The purifieds do get more expensive. But for us, the real question, we're working with a company in Bangladesh looking at the mango bar in particular. And we found that 2 taka is a price point for the base of the pyramid, yet the bars themselves right now, to be cost effective for the company, are 7 tak. So we have to figure out how to bring down that price point. So again, it's making those available and accessible to the base of the pyramid. Fruit purees, my question would be, sugar versus micronutrients. How do we keep them preserved? But that is definitely something we'll try to bring in as long as we can bring the price down. Oh, shall I go to the second one? Okay, Bruce, the ATNI. Yeah, just launched. And I know that it will be a series. It is now, the ATNI actually now has its own institution, and there will be a series of them. And I think where the ATNI will get very powerful is not in a single one-shot access to nutrition index. It will be in the change in companies' attitudes over time as you continue to do the ATNI. And I think probably IFPRI learned that as well with its hunger index. I have to say I don't know how to connect to the second half of your question when it relates to the sustainability approach. Okay, we can talk about that offline.
You might want to just describe, does everybody know
Actually,
ATNI or no? Yeah, maybe you just describe briefly what it is. Yeah, there you go.
And I actually have colleagues in the room who've worked on it closer, but I will give you my short description. The ATNI is called the Access to Nutrition Index, where large food and beverage companies were ranked according to their ability or their work in the area of nutrition, and so it ranks the big beverage and food and beverage companies. So take a look and see how they got ranked. And I think, Lucy, the next question was for you about the health of the mothers. But in terms of GAIN, we are using, for dietary diversity, the mother is a big entry point. And even in that Kenya study, we looked at the mother's consumption, not just the children's.
That up. Sorry, I don't know if this is on. Yeah. For us, the maternal nutrition piece is critically important to kind of bring front and center again. There was, I think, a time where the 1,000 days everyone was focusing on the child, but really there's no child nutrition without good maternal nutrition. WHO has done a fair bit of work on this, in terms of certainly incorporating maternal nutrition targets in the targets that were released last May. The Partnership for Maternal and Child Health also are great partners on that front. But I think as a community, in terms of this linkage in agriculture, nutrition, and health, we probably need to focus more on that. Your point about the breastfeeding woman is well taken, because I myself am a lactating mother currently. So the caloric needs that a woman requires for successful breastfeeding is something that I think we need to be more aware of.
If I could just add to that, there seems to be a real opportunity here, given where you have your interest as well. We know that aflatoxin translates to cattle milk. What do we know about human breast milk? And that's clearly within 1,000 days, and you're aflatoxin
I think we're
linked.
pretty sure it'll go through. Yeah.
And we're pretty sure it'll go through. So there's a huge research area there on breast milk and aflatoxin.
Well, and pesticides and all kinds of stuff. I'm not pretending that you have these, Lucy. Other points or things people want to highlight? I was, about a month ago, there was a big aflatoxin event that John Lamb of Apt Associates put on, and there was huge interest in that. Yeah. That was a quick take.
Okay, good.
Okay. Maybe people want to take more time with the networking later. That's possible. We can be flexible. Okay. The second one will be on policies. And we have Stuart Gillespie on audio from the UK, and John Conrad from the Hunger Project. Stuart, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you well, thanks. Yeah.
Good. I actually had notes on lessons and principles around
Daniel's
partnerships
on it. Okay.
for influencing policy, but perhaps that's not what was required. I can describe the two consortia that we're involved in, or I'm involved in with other partners. Shall I do that?
Yes, please. And I know there's also a lot of interest in kind of the links between policy evidence and advocacy and things, so maybe something on that
exactly,
too.
yeah.
And
Okay, well, I'll just briefly describe the partnerships and the consortia, and also some of the kind of lessons that are being learned as we go along, I suppose, which are relevant to developing partnerships and building on them. So the first consortium is called Transform Nutrition, and it's global overall in focus, although there are 4 focal countries: India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And it's a partnership of 6 organizations, some research, some NGO, well, mainly research and NGO organizations overall, that are focusing on 3 research pillars. The first pillar relates very much to nutrition-specific interventions and ways of understanding. It's basically operational research around implementation, scaling up, ensuring quality and intensity of certain types of interventions as they're scaled up. Second pillar is looking at ways of embedding nutrition considerations in agriculture, social protection, women's empowerment, or maximizing their nutrition sensitivity. And the third is very much sort of, it's a kind of meshing of the communications advocacy along with research into the political economy of decision-making around nutrition. So it's what we call enabling environment. Sorry, I'm getting an echo on the line. I'll keep going. Enabling environments pillar. And here we're engaged in various strands looking at issues around accountability, responsiveness, capacity, leadership, again, linking with communications. We're involved in one of the papers which will be part of the Lancet Nutrition series, looking at the politics of reducing undernutrition, how to build commitment, how to sustain it, and how to accelerate, how to use that commitment and look at ways of accelerating impact, turning it into impact on the ground. That's Transform. The second partnership, which is probably more relevant to A4NH overall, is LANSA. LANSA stands for Leveraging Agriculture for Nutrition in South Asia, in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan. This is led by the Swaminathan Foundation in Chennai, South India. Again, 6 partners. These both last for 6 years, these activities, funded by DFID. Again, we've kind of used the 3-pillar structure, but here we're very much looking at agriculture and nutrition. So the first pillar relates to the environment or the context within agriculture may have impacts on nutrition, the pathways of those impacts, and whether some of those pathways may be blocked or weakened by, for example, other drivers of undernutrition, sanitation, whether what are the ideal enabling conditions for agriculture to actually impact nutrition is one question. The second pillar is looking at policies and strategies directly within the agricultural or agri-food system and understanding their links and impacts on nutrition. And then the third pillar looks at direct interventions or innovations and ways of building the evidence base, number one, but also, and within that, understanding how to maximize the impact of these interventions on nutrition. And, when we're looking at overall, I think what we're learning that there are significant costs or trade-offs and time required to build partnerships, especially between researchers and other organizations, between researchers and NGOs, with governments, with advocacy organizations. What we're finding interesting is transdisciplinary connections between, for example, political scientists or economists and nutritionists. Again, that takes time to understand each other's perspective, but it allows us to develop innovations and new tools and metrics which may be useful for bridging this gap, bridging or leveraging agriculture for nutrition. And, well, there are various principles and processes around that, which I probably won't go into detail. Some of the lessons that we're learning are, yes, that it takes time. We have to build trust. We have to understand comparative advantage, lines of communication, responsibility, accountability. But it could be a trade-off between going faster and going further. And quality, speed, and capacity often work along different timelines. So we're trying to blend those different kind of trajectories to impact in ways which hopefully are more sustainable. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Daniel, do you want to go again next? Or John? Doesn't matter. Okay, looks like Daniel's volunteered John to go next.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, was just thrilled to hear that Stuart and team and Swaminathan and others are tackling the political economy of nutrition, because most of the stunting, this is a 1,000 days event, most of it is in South Asia. Most of it is in countries where on paper there are programs to handle this, and those programs profoundly do not work, and they don't work because of political economic pressures that, actually you should just call that one massive corruption. Massive corruption is interfering with these programs working. If you look at the political economy around a very poor woman in Madhya Pradesh, the state of India, where stunting is the worst, she can't breastfeed properly. And she can't breastfeed properly for a lot of reasons. She's married too young. But she is basically a day laborer working on somebody's land, and the family needs that income. The family is extremely poor. She is seen as the breadwinner through day labor, so she can't breastfeed properly because she's spending the day working in the fields. So income supplementation for that family, even if the integrated child nutrition scheme was actually working properly in her village, she wouldn't be permitted to access it because of her economic income earning duties at probably less than minimum wage. So breaking through, what we found is that, and the policies I want to praise are the policies that lead to really systemic, highly integrated strategies. We found in all of our work around the world that you have to have the whole village system working. You need to have strong devolution, so you've got good governance in the village. You need access to information. You need women to have voice in decision making. And all those are policy choices that countries need to make. Probably the other big area of integration and we love that Feed the Future has embraced a philosophy of integrated ag and nutrition, but what we found is that it also simultaneously has to be linked with the education system and the primary healthcare system. There needs to be authoritative sources of information that women and families listen to about breastfeeding and nutritional practices. Those authoritative processes will probably be the local nurse midwife. And then there needs to be a whole social organization. Women need to be in some kind of associations so that they can have the mobility to actually get information. So the cultural, social, political policy need to be moving in that direction. One of the things that we're pushing for big time in India, for example, is the devolution of the Integrated Child Development Scheme, which is supposed to be handling this, devolving authority for that down to the local level so that there's a real accountability, and also decentralize the procurement for those programs. You know, this is something that Brazil has done. Their local programs are locally sourced, empowering local farmers to earn local incomes, not schlepping multi-gazillion tons of grain all over the country and often sneaking it out of the country. So local sourcing, devolution, decentralization, those are all policy issues that we're pushing on based on our field program barriers that they're constantly running into. So I think that was my 5 minutes to say
No,
now.
thanks, John. That's very helpful. Daniel, and yeah, very illustrative. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make just a few comments to complement what Stuart and John have mentioned here. And as someone who has a background in agricultural research, I worked for about 2 decades with CGIAR in Kenya, and then transitioned to Washington, D.C. to focus on public policy advocacy. I strongly am grateful to see the coming together of R&D experts and advocates. Let me say that at the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa, where I work, we focus on increasing the level and the quality of investments in agriculture, in farmers, in women farmers, so that we can see the kinds of progress that we are seeing today in places like in Africa. I'm gratified to see, for instance, in the last couple of decades, there is scaled up attention towards agriculture, food security, and this idea that nutrition is a key subject that needs to be a part of this, and I see it as an essential glue, especially to these two, what we call divided silos here in Washington, D.C. of agriculture and health. So starting to integrate that is really important. There's been a push definitely from the world system, the UN Millennium Development Goals have kind of pushed people to look at the metrics and things that need to happen so that we can get good outcomes. And we know 2015 is just around the corner, and many countries and communities are way behind. And there's a lot that needs to be done, but a lot of that depends on what you guys are doing out in the field with communities. It takes technology, institution, and policy innovations to create change, and hopefully we can work together in terms of bringing these messages, bringing evidence of what needs to happen, what can create change out in the field. And then as we work on the funding side, which I believe is critical, to make sure that policymakers continue to pay attention. I think we've seen great change. We've seen politicians start to listen to what researchers are doing out there. We've seen governments and multilateral institutions starting to respond by putting in resources, and that can make a lot of difference. And we've seen a lot of new stakeholders come on board. Private foundations, the private sector is interested. They've become major players and even accelerators of this change. But I think increasingly what we need and I hope that this community and through this collaboration we can achieve, is that I see two things that are important. In Africa, we have this new vehicle for development, which they call CADAP, and basically countries have gone ahead, used that framework to identify priority investments in their countries. And there's a huge demand. There's a huge demand for streamlining agriculture, nutrition, and health agenda within that. And I don't think it's been done. And that's really an opportunity that we can be able to capture. But also, I think increasingly, all these policy changes that we are yearning for through frameworks like CADAP will not be achieved unless we build the capacity on the ground for science, for technology, for innovation to really happen. So I see an opportunity here, and that's what I'm addressing today, an opportunity to link up governments with civil society, link up with the private sector. Of course, we know here that the U.S. has the Feed the Future program, but we also know that there's a new alliance for food and nutrition, and there's a lot of attention to engage and work. But on what? You know, the question is on what? I believe this community here has the opportunity to impact on where those investments can be made. Let me make one last question here, point here. I think in all this effort, and there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of energy around this, we have to develop the right kind of metrics to measure progress. So the question is, one, are we headed in the right direction? Have we identified the right priorities? If we continue to invest at the pace that we're investing today, are we going to get the desired outcomes, whether these are nutritional outcomes, agricultural outcomes, health outcomes, and what are the best metrics to use to be able to monitor that progress? And at the same time, maybe do some kind of ex-ante assessments, as well as post-ante assessments that can help us determine which clear paths, which policy changes are needed in order to achieve what we want to achieve. So a great coming together of opportunities and synergies between this community and the advocacy community here and around the world to guide the kinds of investments that are needed to make change.
Saved about 5 minutes, and I want to abuse my position as chair to raise a couple of things that I think we could connect the dots between the good things that the three of you have said. And one is just a kind of piece of information, because John, you were talking about the kind of dysfunctional politics and the gender disempowerment being at the central, quite central to why there's an agriculture nutrition disconnect and why we're getting a lot of malnutrition in India in particular. And there's a program actually coordinated by the World Bank called SAFANSI that's actually looking at political economy, and actually banks do actually get more traction with government sometimes than the rest of us do. So I just wanted to point that out, but I wondered, Stuart's looked at this quite a bit in terms of the Tandy project, in terms of some of these other things, whether he wanted to say anything about Tandy or some of those analyses. So let's start with South Asia, and then I want to come back to Africa and the CADUP and other things. So Stuart, do you want to say something about and maybe some of those types of policy analysis and what you know about SAFANSI and some of these other links?
Sure. Thanks. Tandy, the Tandy project is the first phase of that has been completed. It basically started about 2 or 3 years ago with this question about whether there's something that is not working for agriculture. I mean, it's not. Sorry, that agriculture is not working for nutrition in South Asia or in India in particular, and that we need to know more about where this supposed disconnect lies or how it's developed. And we basically set about 2 strands of work. One is content in the sense of generating evidence to answer those questions about links and pathways between agriculture and nutrition. and the second was more of a process objective, whereby we were sort of bringing together economists and nutritionists to share experiences and perspectives to actually try to get to grips with this and hopefully develop partnerships that could continue beyond the life of the particular 2-year project that we were doing. And to cut a long story short, we developed a conceptual framework, we tested it, we mapped the evidence in India to the 6 or 7 pathways between agriculture and nutrition. And in the process, we built up partnerships or alliances between groups working more on the economic side and others working more on the nutritional side, or agriculture and economics and more on the nutritional side. And we're bringing out a book, hopefully in the next, hopefully by the end of this year, that folds in some of those outputs and some of those papers. So that's Tandy. The second phase of Tandy is being led by the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai, and that's taking some of this work forward beyond the sort of evidence mapping into some more primary data collection around this issue. It is very interesting, actually, though, also the work of, for example, Dean Spears on the sanitation issue in Asia, and his, testing the hypothesis that sanitation differences are the reason behind the gap between Africa and South Asia. And how far can you go with agriculture? So that's an interesting question. I can't remember, John, what was the second thing you wanted me to do?
No, I think that's fine, Stuart.
Okay.
And thanks for raising
All
the
right.
sanitation issue, which is a critical one.
Yeah.
Now, I
okay.
want to come back to Daniel, because you mentioned CADUP, which is energized a lot. And I mean, it's been very energetic, and it's quite systematic, and it deals with monitoring and evaluation and holding people accountable and stuff, which is great. Then we also have on the nutrition side this SUN process. Okay, and there's 34 countries signed up. Many of them are African countries. High-level agreements from heads of state and stuff that this is a priority. How do we stop these two initiatives from competing with other, and how can they cooperate and not make this a zero-sum game, but something that works better?
Well, I think that's interesting, and I think I see that as one of the challenges we face. Traditionally, agriculture and health and nutrition have been seen as separate components. But I think from the research side is where we can start to change this dynamic by showing, using evidence in the field, what the different pathways are towards achieving common outcomes. We know very well here in the US, particularly when funding becomes a constraint, people tend to go different ways and compete on these different issues. But I think if we focus the attention on the outcomes we want to achieve in the field, then coming back, we'll find that there is more in common than in difference between the two teams. I think the idea that now the focus has been on what African governments and African private sector and civil society can do by themselves, what they can bring to the table in these conversations. I think we are starting to see a lot of energy from that end to focusing on outcomes and focusing on what they can achieve. And so I think that's where kind of the collective nature, the collective goal of these different efforts are coming together.
Okay. John, did you want to say something to that?
Yeah, I want to underscore something that Daniel just said, and you mentioned, or Stuart was referring to. I think a huge research need is on the issue of integration. I find that almost no one believes it, and yet those of us in the field really believe it. But I have never been able to throw a document down on someone's desk that shows kind of the correlation coefficients from health, education, nutrition, behavior change, mobility, sanitation, and that we're doing a randomized control trial of our integrated strategy in Ghana, but that's really it wasn't an experimental design, it's really an evaluation, but I think some actual experimental design on fully integrated interventions would support moves from these various country-led strategy processes to really do integrated country strategies.
So you both said something very interesting, and probably Marie will say something about integration when she comes up. But there was a couple things you described, Daniel. One is the bottom-up process, and the other is the ownership. And this relates to a point that Stuart said, is we have to invest in going far and not necessarily going fast sometimes, and to bring people together. So I see those as critical things. Integration is a tough one in some ways, in the sense that we really need to think about where the big payoffs are for integration, and maybe we start not too complicated and then see what some of those are and build them up as we see we need them.
Well, I think the big payoff is in the social component.
Right.
Because
okay.
you look at every single sector, they're all up against gender discrimination.
Yes, yeah.
And so is like every single sector going to do their own transformation of society? No, you need to do it once, and then it pays off for everything, I think.